I want to make it even a little bit more difficult because one of the things that's very important when we're teaching younger people, and there's lots of developmental psychological evidence that supports this, is that students are susceptible to various sorts of psychological pressures, sometimes self-imposed, sometimes imposed from other people, that can make the difficulty of teaching all of these already difficult things even more difficult. And so I want to point out two kinds of experiments. These are not meant to be exhaustive of the psychological literature on all of these points here, that are famous experiments showing the kinds of psychological pressures that we ourselves, no doubt, have experienced in our lives, but that we know lots and lots of students at certain key developmental points in their lives are susceptible to. And so as teachers, we need to be sensitive to this and then be aware of those situations when they arise and know how to handle them. One of the issues is sometimes called peer pressure or conformity. And I think of this as a horizontal, speaking a little bit metaphorically here, that we know students in their cognitive development and in their social development, that they take lots of cues and get lots of pressure from people who are their friends and classmates and other people in their social circles at roughly their same age level and social status level. And that in an unhealthy way, in many cases, that desire to associate socially with their peers can lead to conformist kinds of pressures. And so psychologists are interested in the phenomenon of conformity and have developed certain experiments, and actually a wide body of experiments to study conformity as a phenomenon here. The most famous name associated with conformity experiments is a psychologist by the name of Solomon Asch, pioneer in this field, generated a huge literature and a whole variety of experiments inspired by his initial experiments. And I'm just going to throw a variation of Solomon Asch's conformity experiments out here for your consideration. What Asch would do, he was a professor of psychology, is go to students in his class and say, I'll pay you a couple of dollars, I want you to come into the psychology lab and we're going to do some psychology experiments on you. And so the student would show up and there would be in the psychology lab this giant big projection screen. So I'll put that on the board here, and the student would then be asked to sit in a chair. So I'll draw a student sitting in a chair, and the student is looking at the screen. And the psychologist would say to the student, all right, what we want to do here is test your perceptual acuity. So what I'm going to do is flash various images on the screen here, say 2 stars or 2 balls or 2 lines or whatever. And what I want you to do is tell me whether they're the same or different. And sometimes they'll be quite different, sometimes they'll be identical, sometimes they'll only be slightly different. And we're trying to figure out whether, or what kind of differences people can notice under these sorts of circumstances. All right, now, the student would also find himself sitting with 2 other people, say my years of art school are paying off here, and the psychologist will say, yeah, we're going to test all 3 of you together, and so on. Now, as it happens, these 2 people on either side of the test subject in this case are actually working with Professor Asch. They look like students, but they're not really students, and what Professor Asch has told them is we're not really interested in a perceptual acuity issue, we're interested in conformity here. What I want you to do is, when I flash things on the screen, is to say that they are the same. Even if they are different, say that they are the same. And the interesting thing that we're looking for is this peer pressure issue, because this guy thinks that these other people are also students, same social status here, and so he's going to hear what they say, and the question is to what extent he is going to be influenced by what his peers are saying. So let me get a different color here just to mix things up a little bit. So we say put a circle on here, and suppose I have 2 identical circles, and flash those on the screen, and these 2 people say they're the same. And this person looks at the screen and can see that they are the same, and so of course he says they're the same. And so we do a bunch of things like that. Things are all pretty much the same until we start to mess with this guy a little bit here. We put two lines on the screen, say, and we make one line just a little bit different. This one's a little bit shorter than this one. And we know that this person, from the distance that he is from the screen, can in fact see that they are slightly different in length. But nonetheless, these two accomplices pipe up, oh, they're the same length. Right? And the question is, what does this person say? And what Asch found, I don't know how surprised he was by this, but was that in the test group, the initial test group they ran through, approximately 75% of students in this situation would say the lines are the same. Now we know that the student can see that the lines are different, but nonetheless the student is saying what the student does not think is true, saying something deliberately false, that they're different. And the only reason that he or she could be saying this is that it's a peer pressure. He heard these two people say that they're different, and so he, at least publicly, overrides what he thinks is true in order to go along with the crowd.